So, a super warm welcome to our gut hormone connection workshop. I hope you've got a tea or somewhere cozy, that you're well fed, or you've got dinner waiting for you, and you're ready to settle into this discussion. So, I'm Steph, I'll be your host today if I haven't met you before. And as you're joining, I would love to know how confident you feel currently understanding the female gut hormone connection. So, with one being low and five being high, pop your number in the chat. So, in terms of who are your hosts today? So, as I said, I'm Steph. I'm the founder of the Friday Croissant Club, a women's health and somatic coach. What is the Friday Croissant Club? So, we are a lifestyle health community here to support you in making those small daily changes that can have the biggest impact on health and happiness. My particular passion is about the connection between mental and physical health. So you'll hear us talking a lot about nervous system and stress and the impact that that can have on our health. And I'm really excited because there'll be quite a lot within our discussion today with Helena. My background is in biomedical sciences, and I'm always really keen to understand what's happening with the data. And then I love to integrate that with the more holistic approaches to lifestyle health as well. And I'm thrilled to introduce Helena to the community. Helena is a clinical nutritionist, a women's health expert, somatic coach, and a former elite tennis player. She specializes in female physiology and nervous system health, and it is an absolute pleasure to be hosting alongside her today. So, Helena, a super warm welcome. I'd love it if you could just tell us a little bit about yourself and what you do.
Yeah, thanks for that introduction, Steph. I'm super excited to be here and share a bit more about the female gut and the hormone connection with you guys today. But to give you a little bit more of an introduction to me, because I think a lot of you are meeting for the first time, I've actually been in, let's say, the health world and this professional background for the last decade now. And I currently run my own virtual practice where I work one-on-one mainly with professional, ambitious women who are dealing with things like burnout symptoms, hormonal gut issues, and also a poor relationship to food and body. And I've had that practice for the last couple of years. Before that, I worked primarily in clinics as a nutritionist. And yeah, got the experience and now work on my own. So, but very much before all that, I think, which is really important in terms of what we're looking at today, I was actually a professional athlete that Steph mentioned, where I very much learned firsthand a lot of these masculine style approaches, essentially for male physiology, these ideas of always sort of overriding the body signals and pushing harder and ignoring pain. And whilst many of you might not have been an athlete, I see it a lot in a lot of my high achieving clients and women today. And this very much led me to my work now. So, yeah, I started very much more as a clinical nutritionist, more traditionally helping people with meal plans and supplements. But I kept seeing women specifically coming with the same kind of issues, hormone, gut, fatigue, and still struggling with this sort of superficial sort of meal plan approach. And I really realized that we were missing a very key piece, which was the female specific piece, the female physiology, which we'll get a lot more into today, and also this nervous system piece that Steph mentioned. Because really, when we've been in this stress mode for years, nothing can function right, our digestion and all these things. So I blend these things now in my practice, psychology, nutrition, and nervous system somatic work, specifically for female bodies. And that's what we're going to explore a bit more today.
A true integration and a wealth of experience that you bring to the discussion. And you mentioned the word somatic there. And you might have seen the word somatic a lot on Instagram or TikTok. Helena, could you just break that down for us? What does somatic mean?
Yeah, totally. And this is a really important question because, yeah, it is being thrown around a lot at the moment. Somatic basically just means anything that is body based, so anything that is to do with our body rather than sort of, our thinking brain, right? And so many different things can be somatic, like yoga, breath work, all these types of things, and they are. Um, but I think what's really important to note here and why a nervous system and somatic based approach is so important for our health is because so many of the women that I see specifically we're very good at living up here in our heads, right? Overthinking, maybe planning, trying to understand, trying to get more knowledge, right? More information from Instagram, etc., etc. And actually, we're just very much living from this constantly stressed place, disconnected from the body. And when we live like this over time, the body gets stuck in the stress mode, and our digestion suffers, our hormones suffer, etc. All of this can't work optimally. So, long and the short, somatic work is simply helping you get out of your head and into your body and teaching your body that it's safe to heal and recover and relax because your gut and your hormones can't respond to logic. They won't respond to just thinking yourself better and working better, right? They respond to whether your nervous system feels stressed or safe.
Thank you. Really clear explanation. What are our objectives of today? We want to understand the female gut connection and ultimately, why are we as women different from men? Want to understand the role that your gut plays in health, and then finally discover those 5 simple science-backed ways to support your gut to find hormonal balance. So let's get into the conversation. In the chat, we had 2s and 3s in terms of people's confidence. So let's see if we can shift that needle a little bit today.
Yeah.
Um, so my first question for you this evening is that over the past few years, gut health has really been exploded, right? It's a bit of a buzzword. It's thrown a lot around left and right. I see it all the time at Holland and Barrett. But can you help us understand what gut health actually means, what it looks like, and how it impacts us?
Yeah, of course. Great question because yeah, it's important that we understand what is this at a foundational level. So, our gut health, when we talk about gut health, we are essentially talking about three things that are completely connected. And you can see them on the screen there. But one of the main things you might have heard when we talk about gut health is our microbiome, right? Our gut microbiome. And essentially all that this is just a load, like trillions and millions of bacteria, so microbes that live inside your digestive tract. So we have our gut microbiome as one of these key pillars. And then the second thing that is really important when we talk about gut health is essentially what we call our gut lining and how well and healthy that gut lining is. So we have this barrier between our digestive tract and, say, our blood and the rest of the body. And we want it to be working well and optimally so it keeps food from going out of the digestive tract into our blood and things from coming in. So the health of our gut bacteria is the second important pillar that we talk about when we talk about gut health. And then lastly is just simply our digestion, right? So how well our body is able to break down the food that we're eating, how well it's able to actually absorb the nutrients from the food, and then how well it's able to get rid of the fiber, the toxins, and the rest of the things, right? So this is essentially what we mean when we say gut health. I hope that clears that up. Because I feel like a lot of people just talk about the microbiome, right? Or maybe they've
Yeah,
just
they
heard about that.
do. They absolutely do, and it's really great to hear the full picture. And I think definitely the piece that is not talked about very much either is how food can move in and out, which obviously can lead to a whole host of challenges. So thank you for taking us through that.
No, exactly. And that's a really good point, and we will touch a little bit more on that later. But I think it's also really important to talk about like, so we know what gut health is, but what does it look like in terms of how we are feeling and in our body, right? What is a healthy gut actually? What does it feel like to experience that? So here are some of the examples, and I think the main one, and yeah, we are going to talk about obviously pooing today because that's a really important part, but having consistent, at least one, we would want two mainly, daily bowel movements where they're easy and, they're not too loose or too hard, right? That is a very important indicator that things are working well. Okay. We're also going to be able to have a good amount of stable energy. Of course, this will fluctuate because we do have rhythms throughout the day, but in general, a stable energy. We're not going to have huge crashes, um, minimal bloating, and less pain, right? So, really, a healthy gut would not be reacting to a lot of foods, if any, right? Skin is a really big, important one. that again, I don't think enough people really think about that much. If everything is working all well in our gut and our hormones, our skin is going to be Hailey Bieber-esque, right? Well, yeah. So that's a good indication. Um, our mood is a really, really big one as well that we're going to talk a lot more about and the connection with that. And our immune system, right? We're not going to be getting every cold and flu that comes around. And lastly, our hormones, again, a big thing we're going to talk about today. They're going to be pretty regular, pretty balanced. Things are going to work well, right? We're not going to be perfect, but things are going to be working well. That is what a healthy gut will look and feel like. Yeah.
Yeah, I think I think, whenever I previously thought about the gut, I thought it was about bowel movements and bloating. But in everything that you've covered here, it's almost everything, right, that we experience, our gut can influence.
Yeah, exactly. So that very much is the next thing that I was going to say was we have our gut health, we have what a healthy gut is supposed to maybe feel and look like. And then really importantly, we have to talk about everything else that our gut impacts because it's not just about what we eat and how we digest it. It impacts everything. So you can see a couple of things on the slide. And I think really importantly today is our period as women, right? Our hormones, our menstrual cycle. And I won't dive too much on this now because we're going to talk about it a little bit later. But essentially, if our gut is responsible for whether we are able to eliminate excess hormones and keep that balance or not. So our gut health is really important in terms of that. We mentioned mood, having a stable mood would be an indication of a healthy gut. And again, this is something I don't think many people talk about that much either, is that I'm sure some of you have heard of like the happy hormone, like serotonin is the happy hormone, right? Serotonin is a hormone that essentially makes us want to like live our life, right? Get out, be active, socialize. Um, and 90% of this hormone is made in our gut. So if we think about our mood, anxiety, etc., and things like that, if our gut is not working well for us, this is going to be hugely indicative in our mood and vice versa. So also there is a heavy, heavy impact with our immune system because 80% of all our immune cells, which are the guys that fight off all the bad, all the viruses, all the colds and flus and anything like that, that response and those cells are made in our gut and they live in that gut lining, that barrier we talked about. Okay. So again, you can clearly see this is a really, really important how our gut is being in terms of our immune system. Um, our stress levels, I mean, again, correlated to mood a little bit, right? But this is something that is in line with what you mentioned, Steph, about in terms of sort of more that mind, body, right? Mental and physical wellness. So our gut and our brain are literally connected via what you might have heard of as our vagus nerve. And they're talking all the time. They're in constant communication. So if we have imbalance in the gut or we have inflammation, which is just another kind of term for that, if we have it in the gut, we're going to have it in our brain. So we're going to have mood, anxiety, depression, things like that if we are struggling with some of these gut symptoms. And this is huge this is actually something that's come out a lot more recently in research, like really understanding that inflammation here and here, there won't be one without the other, which is really significant, right? And then the last thing is obviously our energy. If we can't really absorb the good things about what we're eating, we can't make energy and we can't have good hormonal balance and everything else that comes with that. So, as you can see, yeah, it's all in your gut. I mean, the gut is super, super, super important, right? Especially when we talk more about hormones.
Okay, so that's all well and good, but we are here to talk about what that means for women.
Mm-hmm.
I have worked in the pharmaceutical industry for many years. I'm quite close to a lot of clinical data, and I'm aware of the data gaps that exist for women. When we look on the internet, we see so much advice and protocols that are very one size fits all. For example, I've seen women call out the piece about caffeine not being great if we drink it in the morning before we've eaten, and also things like hit first thing in the morning before we've eaten. And then I've seen a lot of like quite high profile men basically dispel these claims because, the data doesn't support it.
Mhm.
So, what are your thoughts on this? Can you highlight some of the challenges and explain some of the differences when it comes to the female gut?
Mm-hmm. This is a really great question, and I love to answer this question. Yeah, I mean, the long and the short of it is that we are not tiny men. We are not the same as them. And what's really important to talk about here is that when we talk about data, for example, is that actually women have not been included in medical data. They were excluded from medical trials up until 1993. So no research at all was even done on women up until this point. And then even since then, um, what makes the female body different and unique is our hormonal profile, right? Is the monthly cycle we go through. And this is often deemed as too variable, right? By researchers. Like they don't want to have that complication of their data in there. And this is so important because it basically means that most of the health advice and even things like medication and dosages and variables is made for a male body and not a female body. And when we actually take a moment to like sink that in and really feel that, it's huge and it's very clear why a lot of women are struggling with a lot more things and hormones and things like that now that the male molecules and the masculine approaches don't solve. And I know you mentioned this idea of caffeine. And again, I love talking about this because a lot of my clients talk to me about caffeine. So this is a great example because caffeine, for example, in women, we literally have a genetic variation where we metabolize it more slowly. So what that actually means is it stays in our system longer. So we're more sensitive to it, right? So if it stays in our system longer, it's going to give a greater reaction in our body. And most of us would drink it in the morning, maybe even before food. And in the morning, we already have our stress hormone, which is cortisol, at its highest. So if we are then drinking coffee when we already have a high cortisol level there, we're just going to be spiking our stress hormones even more. And we're going to spike them more than we would if we were in a male body, right? What's important to know about spiking this, our cortisol and the stress hormones, is that then we're going to have a crash. So that's why a lot of us crash at 2 p.m., reaching for more coffee or even sugar, because they are completely related. So blood sugar and cortisol are integrated, right? And then if we take it a step further, I'm not sure how many of you will be familiar of the term the luteal phase, but essentially in women, this is the week before we have our period. And during this week, our estrogen and our progesterone hormones are at their lowest. So our resilience to stress is at its lowest point. Men don't have this. We have this, right? So then if you think about grabbing your cup of coffee, which spikes your cortisol, right? Of course, yes, it gives you this fake energy. It gives you this woo, but actually what's it doing is spiking your stress hormone. So when we think about having that, this is going to impact and even worsen more of our hormonal balance, especially as we go through these different phases in the month. However, exactly like you said, when we share this as women, like we might share, oh, actually, like I get this kind of spike, I get this anxiety, is often dismissed and dismissed by men because health data, medical data, and even wellness culture now has very much accepted that the male physiology is what's normal and that female physiology and our symptoms and our responses are complicated, right? So, yeah, and a very good slide here with this kind of summed up, right? Medicine and wellness culture now still treat the male body as a default. Meaning that a lot of our symptoms as women are often misdiagnosed, and more importantly, just normalized. Like it's just so normal for us all to be exhausted, have trouble sleeping, have terrible periods, bad acne, and it's just normal. But it's not.
Or you just go to the GP, right, and they give you a birth control pill,
Yeah.
because that's all your
Well,
problems.
exactly. And what does the birth control actually do? It stops you having your hormonal fluctuations, right?
Yeah,
So it essentially
yeah.
just makes you more of a, I'm not going to say more of a male physiology because we can never be the male physiology, but it takes away what makes us us. And that's not solving a problem,
Yeah.
right? That's a band-aid.
Yeah, for sure. And I think there's another really interesting point in terms of what you said on the previous slide around the week before our period, we're more susceptible to stress responses.
Mhm.
That actually, if you're already a high functioning, kind of high stress, maybe slightly high anxiety woman, and then you add coffee into the mix, and it's the week before your period, then the imbalance could be, quite significant, right? Because you've got all those layers added into the mix.
Yeah, exactly. And that's a really important thing to note. I mean, I think in our modern world, there's not, I mean, please find me a woman that's actually not dealing with any kind of chronic stress. So in reality, most of us are already living with this higher cortisol level just because of our external environment, our lifestyle, work, food and diet culture and things like that. So that's a really important thing to think about. And I think I also see a lot of people that come to me and I always give them an intake questionnaire and then I say, I have this, I'm like, rate to your stress levels, and they rate it super low. And yet they're coming to me with all of these symptoms of
Yeah.
of years of chronic stress. So in reality, if you have any kind of symptom going on, in your body, and I know we've normalized a lot of them, so we don't really feel like they're a big deal. But if you have any kind of, if you're not literally in this full level of good health and well-being, that means that you are under chronic stress in some form, right? And so caffeine's not going to help, right?
Yeah.
We want to create sustainable energy, not fake energy from caffeine, right? So yeah.
Okay. So then what does that look like from a female gut perspective? Where do we see those differences?
Yeah, no, exactly. So off the back of that last question, it's really important for us to know, so what is the female gut like compared to a man's, right? And this is not specifically just to the gut, it's very much to the whole body. But obviously the biggest thing is our hormonal rhythm, right? So men do have a rhythm. They follow the daily rhythm, right? It was what we call circadian rhythm, if you've ever heard of that. So they follow this 24-hour clock, essentially, kind of, well, more in the olden times, but we still follow it. Rising with the sun, getting energy like that, having all our processes, and then winding down and going to sleep, right? That's a 24-hour circadian rhythm. Men follow that, okay? And women, we also follow that, but then we also have our own rhythm called the infradian rhythm, which is our essentially 28-day rhythm. And obviously, it's not completely 28 days for most of us. Um, but we have these hormonal shifts throughout the month, right? We have essentially, those four phases that, we can dive into in the questions if we want. But these hormonal shifts influence everything. They influence our gut bacteria, they influence our digestion, they influence our inflammation levels, they influence our stress resilience that we talked about a little bit. They influence our metabolism. There's a week every month where we foundationally need like 200 to 300 more calories than other weeks, right? So we are shifting throughout each month, every year. So very different. And these all impact our gut, right? It's also really important to talk about the fact that, I mean, I say higher risk here on the slide, but because of these fluctuations and because of our difference, we are now more likely to experience things like IBS, autoimmune, thyroid issues, and everything. And yes, we can say it's due to greater gut sensitivity, and it is, but it's mainly because we're not working with our physiology, right? So it's not like we're just going to get all these things because we're women. We're getting more of these things because we are not living and supporting ourselves and our guts and our hormones as women. Okay. The stress response here again is really important to talk about. We actually have a higher baseline of cortisol than men, and we have a longer stress recovery. And what I mean by this is, and these are all adaptations from, primal back in the day, right? And they evolved for a reason. They evolved for us to be really great caregivers, right? Really great child rearers, etc., etc. But we have a longer stress recovery. So when something happens that we perceive stressful, we stay activated longer than men. And we also have this pattern in us, which I'm sure many of you might be able to relate to. I know I certainly could when I was um, growing up, in this sense of like more of a keeping the peace pattern. We want to please others. Men don't really have this, but it was our survival pattern that we learn in our nervous system, and that's linked with the gut, right? So we do have a higher baseline for this than men, and that's not a weakness. It's actually a big part of our superpower. We are more able to like suss out people's emotions, right? We're more able to usually read things than men, and it's for a reason. But it also means we have to acknowledge that and not live in the same way as they do, right? In completely correlated with this, obviously, is then the gut brain link that we mentioned. And so we have a more tightly connected one in the female body, right? Ours is more online, it's more aware. And this is, I think, amazing because it makes us so, like I said, right, so able to be present emotionally and all these kind of things. And then the last thing, and you did touch upon it, Steph, but we also do, if we think about external factors in terms of the gut, we have the pill factor. So, whilst hormonal contraception was and is still amazing for many reasons, right? It gave us freedom as women. It does significantly alter our gut bacteria. And so it can create this imbalance alongside what it does to our hormones. So these are all very specific things to women that affect the female gut, right? And are important to know.
So then on that note, can you talk us through like what the female gut connection is? How do the gut and hormones interact with each other?
Yeah, for sure. Essentially, the link between the female gut and hormones, which we've mentioned a little bit, but it's really to do with this elimination of our hormones that the gut has this huge role in, right? So we can talk a little deeper about this. And there's what we call the estrobolome that we have as women. And you don't need to remember this fancy word, but I like to give you facts. Okay. So we have the estrobolome, and this lives inside of our gut and our digestive tract. And essentially, what it is the control center for estrogen. And estrogen is a really big hormone in our female bodies, right? And the estrobolome is essentially a group of bacteria. So when we think about the microbiome, it's a big part of bacteria that really decides if old estrogen gets taken out of the body through your poop, right? Or whether it gets reabsorbed into the body, leading to estrogen excess. And why this is super important is because high levels of estrogen, a lot of people call it estrogen dominance now, is exactly what causes PMS, painful periods, heavy periods, breast tenderness, bloating, things like fibrocystic breasts, cysts in our ovaries, endometriosis. There's a high estrogen level in it. Weight gain, especially in our hips and thighs, is a big sign. And it heavily creates a lot of mood stuff, anxiety, irritability, and also is a huge player in breast and ovarian cancers. These are all estrogen dominant cancers. So this is kind of huge for us as women, right? And super, super important.
And it's kind of shocking, right? Because how many of these things do so many women suffer from? And to your previous point, it's normalized. Or you go to the GP and nobody says, and this is no shade at the GP, there's capacity issues, etc. But you go to see a doctor, and so often the solution that you're given, as I said previously, is a pill rather than actually having a conversation about what could be something that we could just alter through our day-to-day habits and
Mm.
actually get to the root cause of. So yeah, I mean, when you look at that list, I think, it's yeah, it's pretty shocking.
I think that's a really important thing just to mention that you did in terms of, what many of us might have experienced our doctors and our primary care providers, and they are amazing at what they do, but they are not trained in lifestyle medicine, right? And what I mean by that is that they are trained to essentially, you break your leg, they're going to fix it, right? But with a lot of the things that we're struggling with now in our modern world, for example, all of those things on those lists, they're not going to be solved by a pill, right? That's a band-aid solution. They are the result of things in our lifestyle. So, our doctors do the best they can, but they're not trained in this. They have none of the nutritional or the lifestyle or any female specific, let's get real at all, training. So it's important that we address issues that are caused by lifestyle with lifestyle solutions. Yeah. So we can dive into this slide a little bit more now. So this is just very much highlighting again that link, right? So the gut and hormone link. And I've mentioned this a little bit before, but I want to talk about it a bit more in terms of how does the gut actually play a role in terms of this elimination of estrogen and other hormones, right? But estrogen is the big one, with the estrobolome. And it's through our poo, right? So if we are constipated, which so many people are and they don't even really realize, these hormones are not getting we're not getting rid of them. They're getting reabsorbed into our bodies. So it doesn't really matter what else you're doing in your daily life. If we're not pooping, not going to feel great, right? And I'll touch a little bit more here on this kind of inflammation loop. And I think we have a great slide on it next, which is sort of like this stress cycle loop. Because if we have stress in the gut, like you said, we're going to have stress in the brain, and then we're also going to have stress with our hormones. Okay. So everything is sort of a feedback loop. And Steph, if you want to go to the next slide, we can sort of talk through this feedback loop and what it might look like, and so they get a better idea of things, right? So this stress cycle starts very much with us having like a stressful stimuli. And I want to just stop here at the beginning because I think a lot of people will be like, well, what is stress, right? What do we mean by stress, especially stress on the gut and the hormones, right? So this can be anything from, when we think about stress damaging our gut, this can be processed food, alcohol, caffeine without food in the morning. But it can also be working late at night, not telling your friend no when you want to, right? Like not actually meeting your body and your needs where it is, not sleeping, all of these external things, any of these are a stressor. For women specifically, something that I see a lot in my practice is like this history of dieting, right? Every time we restrict any food group, this causes stress on our female system. And our female system is so sensitive to this, way more than the male system, right? So I'm not going to continue down this rabbit hole, but you can get a sense of all the things that are playing a role in this cycle, okay? So we have this stressful stimuli, that stressful thing, and that stress damages some of the gut, right? The bacteria, maybe the lining. This damaged gut then obviously can't eliminate our hormones properly, right? Our estrobolome is not going to work effectively. So hormones build up, creates this estrogen dominance that we talked about. But then in turn, this estrogen dominance worsens our constipation, right? And this constipation then worsens even more the hormones that we can get rid of or reabsorb. So then the estrogen levels get higher. And this stress also depletes nutrients that we need for healthy hormone production. Okay. So we don't even have the building blocks to make those healthy, happy hormones. But the damaged gut can't absorb those nutrients anyway, because it's already pretty stressed and damaged. So then we have this hormone imbalance, and this hormone imbalance creates even more inflammation in the gut and the body. And this inflammation makes the gut worse because we talked about this vagus nerve, didn't we? We talked about the communication between the body and everything. And then the unhappy gut signals more stress to our brain, more cortisol, our stress hormones released, and it goes round. Okay, so it's all so connected. But what that means is if we just work heavily on reducing these stress stimuli and these stresses, we can come back into balance. But I just wanted to paint that picture for you, and I understand it's probably a lot of information, but I think you get the gist here of how
And
it's
it
related.
sounds a bit depressing, right, when you talk through this, and
Yeah,
it's like, wow,
it does.
there's a lot going on. But
Yeah.
actually, I mean, as you said, you think about the stress stimuli in your life, and I think I've had this conversation a couple of times in the past few weeks that you mentioned it before, especially, if you're living if you're living in a city and you are an ambitious woman and you have a demanding job, and maybe you also have a baby or other people who demand things from you as well, not demand, but need your time and attention, then actually it's really easy for these what seem like menial things,
Yeah.
but to create quite a big stress impact within our lives.
Mhm.
So it's really about recognizing actually it can be something that doesn't seem stressful, but can be one of those important stimuli into the cycle.
Well, totally. And unfortunately, the sort of world that we live in, I say unfortunately because actually, there's a lot more awareness coming out about it. But, just a lot of the things that probably most of us our age have grown up with in terms of like diet culture and this very hustle culture, those are huge stresses on our female body, and they've heavily, heavily influenced where we are now if we're in sort of our late 20s, early 30s, 40s, etc. And I think something really important to take away from this, whilst it might seem a little depressing, is that there's no quick fix. Okay. Things have happened over time and built up. So all these quick fixes you see promised everywhere, they're not going to sort it out. But what can is actually much easier and simpler than you think. And you don't have to do all of it, right? We're not looking for perfection, but even just simple food changes, simple boundary changes, simple sleep changes actually do so much change and so much wonder, right? It's actually not as hard as we might think, if that.
So this might seem overwhelming, but actually the solution can be relatively simple, right? We'll discuss this a little bit, but this is ultimately how imbalance might show up in your body.
Yeah.
Um, and I just like to ask you guys on the line, is there things here that you feel you have experienced in the past or experience now? Are there things here that feel familiar to you? My next question, I really appreciate that every single person is different, but what are some of the things that might have led to these imbalances? I know we have discussed this a little bit already as we've been going through with the discussion, but yeah, how did we end up here?
Yeah, no, we can sum it up a little bit, right? So yeah, the root cause might not look like the obvious one. There are a lot of things at play that build up over time. I'm not going to touch on everything on this slide, but essentially they create what I've mentioned is this stress storm, right? And for women, this is really important and specific. So some key things at play here really are living in this constant go mode, right? With no real switch off. And I appreciate some of us have scenarios, kids, etc., where we do just have a lot less time. But that it's not necessarily correlating to our nervous system feeling like we don't have time, if that makes sense. And we can talk about that after.
Yeah.
Sleep is a huge one. We want to be 8 to 9 hours feeling recovered and rested, but a lot of us have terrible quality of sleep. This is very important with the female body, is this culture of pushing our body too hard. And also, I see it a lot with people like exercising to earn their food, right? Punishing their body and going to a lot of these HIIT classes all the time, not eating fully what I would say is enough, and being super busy all the time. This is a perfect stress storm, right? And pretty much sums up most of the people that I know in London, that I grew up with in London, which is no fault of their own. It's
We
just
love a
very
Barry's boot camp. What can we
yeah,
say?
listen, it's just the environment we grew up with, but it is
Yeah.
perfect storm. Perfectionism is a really big thing here, right? Obviously, we've got the food stuff and lifestyle, but it's really important to talk about some of these things. So if we're someone that like we don't really ever let ourselves rest, right? We feel guilty for maybe having an afternoon reading a book or taking some time off. This is a key sign our nervous system is in overdrive, which means we are in this stress state, right?
So
And
if we feel guilty resting,
yeah.
that's a sign that we're ultimately overstimulated and sitting more within that maybe fight or flight versus within our rest digest
Yeah,
state.
100%. It's a key sign and so common, right? And then the last thing that I want to mention really specifically outside of food and things is this suppressing emotions and pleasing other people, because this is important as women, because this is a big pattern in our nervous system from society and just conditioning. Yes, we want to say, we want to say no. Um, our body perceives a stress, right? We're not feeling safe enough to fully embody what we want in that moment. And that is a really, really key piece. Food and lifestyle, dieting as women, we only have to go on one diet where we restrict our calories and feel hunger, and that causes extreme stress on our female body. We perceive a famine, and our nervous system goes into overdrive. And I'm sure all of you have probably dieted once. I know I definitely did, right, when I was younger, before I was in this world. And not eating enough variety, this could be a very key piece, right? We want to have a lot of fiber and things. Alcohol is a really big one. Um, Really, really disruptive to our gut. Okay. And then a couple bits on the right, which are really important to touch upon. We have a little bit birth control. Again, whilst it's amazing, we have that freedom. It's really, really disruptive to our gut and our hormones. It depletes all our essential nutrients like magnesium. I could go on and on about this. Antibiotics, very specifically, one course wipes out all the bad guys, right, that we're trying to get rid of when we have an infection, the bad bacteria, but it also wipes out all the good bacteria. So it creates a breeding, a ground for disbalance in the gut, and those are heavily overused. Um, and then some life stuff, right? A big stressful life event, of course. Just being a woman in 2025, I mean, yeah. Then postpartum and things like that, but that's slightly different cycle of life, right? And coming off the pill also puts the body under more stress. We have to rebalance. So yes, a lot of things all together,
A lot of things.
right?
A lot of important things to call out though that we don't, as we said previously, we don't necessarily perceive as stress. Um,
Mhm.
so I think it's important to touch on. Um,
Yeah.
so then, I think looking in the chat as well, we've got people experiencing super painful periods, endobelly. I think a lot of people have experienced a lot of the things that we've been discussing. So, can you guide us through some simple strategies that we can use to support our gut and help to balance our hormone?
Yes, of course.
There's
I
the
love that picture.
nonsense, what can we do about it?
We can do a lot. We can do a lot, guys. Okay. But I want to keep it quite simple for you. And because obviously we shared a lot of information, and the goal is never to overwhelm, um, but to provide a clear picture. Okay. So getting a better balance in your gut and your hormones really starts with these foundations that most of us were never taught, right? So it's really looking at what we're eating, how we're sleeping, how we're pooing, and then also some of these stress and relationship style emotions, boundaries, habits. Okay. So I'll run through them quickly with you guys. A really key thing to note is to eat enough, okay, and regularly. So a lot of advice is, in the health food diet world from men. Okay. I get a lot of people come to me that have been told X, Y, and Z by their personal trainer. Okay. We want to eat 3 meals a day. We want to have all the food groups, protein, carbohydrates, and fats. You do not need to hit 100 million 80 grams of protein. Please, please no. Please no. Like we really do not. But we don't want to be eliminating anything. We don't want to be going on low carbs. We don't want to be going on low fat. These are actually the building blocks for our hormones. So we want to just eat everything, right? Nutrient dense whole foods. We don't want to skip meals and go long periods of time between not eating. I know a lot of people have been talking about intermittent fasting and how amazing it is for us. Yes, if you're a man. If you're a woman, no, right? We want to go max, well, especially if you're a woman with any kind of symptoms, right? We want to go max 12 hours, so a simple night's sleep in between dinner and breakfast, okay? Please, 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 no intermittent fasting. Um, your body needs fuel to make hormones and to have a healthy, nourished gut, okay? So when we think more about sleep, I mean, it's probably things you might have heard before, but we do want to really prioritize sleep. I think people really underestimate how important sleep is. When we have those, I'd say 7 to 9 hours, women, we actually need more sleep than men. So I would say at least eight. Um, but when we have that 8 hour window, our body, our brain and our body literally clears out waste and clears out processes. So we have to get a minimum amount of time that our body goes through cycles in the night to actually have that. We have hormonal repair during the night. We have full body repair. We have to sleep, otherwise we won't get it. And then, things like Saying no a little bit more. I don't know. I have not met a woman that really I feel says no enough. But just saying no to protect your energy, right? Like having some space in your calendar where you're like, I've got no plans, and if someone asks me, I'm going to say, sorry, not today. And really looking at our boundaries, like where is our energy leaking? Where are we giving to too many people that are not giving back? This is really, really, really important for our female well-being. Um, Daily nervous system practice. I mean, we can talk a little bit more about this after in questions, Steph, but really just setting aside a little bit of time where we take space for ourselves, right? No stimuli, even just like orienting to our room like we did at the beginning, or just coming in for a couple breaths with our body, or even just going for a walk without our phone. Just things that disconnect from everything that overstimulates us and brings us back to the present where we are. Um, Pooing, we've talked about this quite a bit, but we want to support our poop with hydration. Again, I think this is really not talked about enough. We want to have at least 2 to 3 liters of water a day, like a lot, right? A lot of water, because most people are not drinking enough water. So we can start very easily there. Fiber is really important here too. So if we just think about not doing anything stressful, but essentially just adding a few more veggies and fruits to our day, right? We don't need to think about taking loads of things out, just adding a few more of the good stuff in. Magnesium can be super helpful here for like before bed and things like that to help with the gut and the nervous system. And we want to move our body, but we don't want to go to HIIT every day. We want to do walks and slower things, maybe, right? But things that get us going. Swimming's great, things like that. Um, Add in some gut supporting foods. You might have heard about some of this if you've done any research on gut, but yeah, they are really supportive. Things like sauerkraut and kimchi, which are these fermented foods. But we want to start small with this, right? Please don't just go and add like hundreds to your plate because, again, like things that are unfamiliar to the gut will create some kind of response. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. It's just we want to start small. Um, and where possible, looking at our alcohol, right? Looking at our alcohol and looking at our processed food consumption. So all the foods that are not necessarily, um, homemade or just fruits and vegetables, right? Things that are contain a lot of stuff that actually disrupt our gut lining. And then lastly, I really want to say here, which I think is super important, is to actually work with someone on these things because I think the Instagram world and just the social media world has made so much information available that um, people think that they can sort of just use that, but in reality, that's not personalized to them. And healing does just in general happen when we're in relationship with someone. It doesn't happen by reading lots more things. We need support. We need someone that knows what healing over time looks like. And in general, we really want to be seeing integrative practitioners who have an idea about the female body and about the nervous system, right? This stress response and how it affects everything. So I think that would be a very key takeaway for a lot of people. But the other things are great places to start. There is a lot that you can do and also very simple things, I think.
Yeah, they're very, there's some very I guess basic things here, right? But that's where the goodness is made. The goodness is made within the basics. Something that I try to hammer home all of the time. So yeah, I think, it might seem simple, but actually simplicity is where the majority of the solutions lie. So I think it's really important to reiterate. And just back to the nervous system piece that you mentioned as well, that actually as women, we thrive when we co-regulate, right? Not
Yeah,
self-regulate.
this is really
And
important.
we
Yeah.
thrive in community, we thrive in connection. So
Mm.
actually, it is why it's so important not to just go it alone and to be surrounded by either people who are doing similar things or to work with a practitioner who can help you get there. To wrap it up in terms of key takeaways, Helena, do you want to just run us through these?
Okay, let's summarize. Everything's connected, right, guys? Gut, brain, hormones, nervous system. It's all one. We can't just target specific ones. They all work in harmony. And our symptoms can show up anywhere, right? Mood, skin, energy, cycles, immune system. something that I really love to share with my clients is that our symptoms are messengers, right? Because I feel like we can feel very down and depressed when we have things in our body that are happening, but actually they're just the body showing you, hey, please listen. Hey, there's something, we're not being supported over here. I don't know why I'm elbowing, but yeah, like as if it's talking to
You're
us
a
in different
symptom.
body parts. Yeah, I'm like, hey. um, but that is the language of our body. And the longer we don't pay attention to it, the louder it screams. So symptoms can show up everywhere. They're all related from these main things. And maybe we can start listening to them and addressing them, right? Chronic stress in all its forms is the biggest gut disruptor and therefore hormone disruptor. And healing and really coming into, I don't love this word healing, but regaining balance and really becoming nourished and energized and vibrant and pain-free or things like that is completely possible when we start to work with our body, right? When we start to listen to it and we start to work not against it. We don't berate it for maybe having a bad period or things like that, but we start to listen like, why is this happening? What are you trying to tell me? And we address what's happening at the root. So those would be my takeaways for you guys today.
I think we should change healing for thriving because,
Yeah, I
yeah,
mean,
let's do that. We thrive when, yeah, we work with our bodies. Okay, so we've got a few
yeah,
questions in the chat. I'll start at the top. What sort of protein, carb, fat level ratios should we be eating for a happy gut?
it's a great question. I will answer this in two parts. One, in general, I would say that we don't really need to be counting macros to the T. But in general, I would say the biggest thing to focus on is probably that protein level, and just making sure that if we're trying to heal a little bit more, right, we're trying to work on this, that each meal does have around a 20 gram of protein, right? Doesn't need to be 50 grams, but just having that base level, then our hormones will be stable. Okay. Carb and fat level is, I I love to say, it's very much just what your body actually feels and needs in the time. I would just focus on the protein level, and I would focus more on what the foods are rather than what the macros are. So if we think about carbohydrates, again, they get a bad rep. But when I talk about carbohydrates, what I'm really talking about are complex carbohydrates. So these are things like sweet potatoes, rice, right? They're not your muffins, your crisps, etc. There's a very key difference here. And complex carbohydrates are great for us and great for our gut. And it's the more processed, simple carbs that spike our blood sugar and that get the bad rep from diet culture, right? So we want carbohydrates. We want lots of them. The female body thrives on them. So again, I wouldn't say a specific level of macro. I would just say included at every meal. So, if you think like your salmon and a sweet potato and things like that.
So almost if you were looking at a plate, would it be, I guess you said like palm size amounts of each, right? Relatively even, not an excess of one or the other. I guess trusting your instinct a little bit, right? In terms of what looks sensible.
Well, I think again, like I made the distinction with the carbohydrates, there's a really important thing to talk about fats. So we have what we call healthy fats, and these are so important for our hormones as women. So when I say a healthy fat, I mean things like avocado, olives, nuts, things like that. They will never make you fat, right? So if we have something like that on our plate, then we're doing good with our fats. Then we can have fats, what are unhealthy fats, right? Whereas we think like more things like, the fat on bacon and processed fats and things like that.
Yeah.
But I do have a very simple eat for your hormone health guide that I think me and Steph were thinking about sending out to you guys
Yeah.
after this. So if that's something that people would like, it breaks a lot of this down in a lot more detail. We can do that.
Perfect. Okay, the next question, and this isn't from me, you'll be surprised, but what are your thoughts on decaf coffee?
This is a really great question. And what I would say to you is, how do you feel after you drink your decaf coffee? That's what I would say, right? Obviously, we don't have specifically the caffeine in it, but caffeine comes from the coffee bean, right? And there's still a level of similarity there and still a level of the same function that our body's metabolizing it, if that makes sense. But I would say, how do you feel after decaf coffee? It's not something I would tell someone to not drink, but if you feel bad after it, then I wouldn't drink. But I would say any kind of coffee always after food, because caffeine and the coffee bean in general is just harsh on the stomach lining.
Okay, it's good to know. Thank you. The next one is, are there any vitamins or supplements that you would recommend? For example, is Simprove worth the hype?
This is a really great question. Um, so let me answer this clearly and concisely. Vitamins and supplements are exactly what they say, supplements. So they are supplementary. Okay. So that means they are just something to support on the outside. So if we're not doing all the foundations and the basics first, I don't think it's even important to look at supplements. Okay. The next thing I would say is any supplements you take, I would get recommended by someone who knows specifically professional grade supplements, not your average Holland and Barat store, because they are rubbish and full of rubbish.
But they're full of rubbish. They're
They're
basically
full
not
of
ultra
rubbish.
processed food. Yeah.
One supplement and one vitamin is not going to fix your problems. They can be very supported when I work with clients, primarily we work on the foundations, right? The nervous system work, the food, lifestyle, and sometimes a few targeted supplements, but they are only to be brought in as a support. I do actually quite like Simprove. I do use it with some people, so I think it is a really nice place to start. But again, we want to look at the foundations of our behaviors first. Simprove has got some good research behind it, and I do quite like it. So I hope that answers your question.
But I think at the end of the day, back to your point, if you still have all of those stress stimuli and you're taking Simprove, it's not going to solve the problem. Like it needs to be a two-pronged approach.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Again, there's nuance and there's personalization to everyone's experience. So, for example, if you are having to take a course of antibiotics, because for sometimes we just might have to, right? Many times we probably would be better off not, but sometimes we do. Um, and so if we do have to take them, then I would definitely say get recommended a high quality probiotic because you are in the process of wiping out your bacteria, right? Um, but yeah, in general, not just take a random probiotic and hope you're doing the best, right? There's not that much efficacy and actual results coming from most probiotics these days. So yeah.
Okay. The final question we have in the chat, and then I have one that was sent previous, is are there any specific things for women on birth control, for medical purposes that can help heal the gut, or is it just the same practices as discussed?
Yeah, this is a really good question because obviously some people choose to be on birth control or just have to be. So here would be what my answer is to that. When we are on birth control, we will be depleting certain minerals and vitamins. We just will things like magnesium and B vitamins and B6 specifically. So everything that we talked about is going to be super supportive as much as it can be when you are taking a pill that is fundamentally changing your hormonal profile, right, as a woman, which will change how everything works. So it's super important to support your body as best as you can in those ways we mentioned. And then some targeted supplements in that situation would be very beneficial.
And then the final question that I have here is one that you just touched on slightly in the previous question. But if you are somebody who is maybe in the weeds of your body really screaming at you, and therefore you've had loads of infections and you've had a ton of antibiotics, are there any specific foods or supplements or advice to build the gut back up? And this lady has said there's a lot of probiotics out there, but I don't think they're necessarily made with our complexities in mind. So, what's the best thing for that person who's maybe been on 10 courses of antibiotics this year to do?
Yeah, that's a really good point. So again, I would advise her to work with someone that can really prescribe the right supplements that she needs in that case, and that can work with her as the body adjusts to it. there's a really great company that I use with clients that is really, really powerful when there is a lot of disruption. And they really do help and support in rebuilding that gut, um, not only bacteria, but also the lining. But even more important than that, really is what we're eating and the state of our nervous system when we are eating, right? And when we are going about our daily life. Because if we're in that stress state, there's no blood flow to the digestion, none of it works. Okay. So those foundational practices things that we mentioned at the end, and some targeted supplements would be really useful. And if she did want to look in it specifically, the company Healthy Gut, they're an American company,
Yeah.
have some really, really great stuff on there, very specific for that. But yeah, I would always advise.
Digestive enzymes you've recommended to me before.
Yeah, they are. That's the company that I use with my clients if we use them. They're really, really high grade. They're really great. And you can start gently. I think that's the big thing is that when you are getting support from someone, you know to start gently. And yeah, yeah.
Wonderful. Well, that is all the questions that we have. So thank you for submitting those. Then it's time to wrap up. So, Helen, I just want to say a huge thank you for joining us. It's been an absolute pleasure. We asked at the beginning, on a scale of 1 to 5, how confident do you feel in understanding the gut hormone connection? I'm going to ask you that question again. Please be totally honest and pop your answer in the chat. And then there's a couple of other things. So at the Friday Croissant Club sessions that we run, we always end with what's one key takeaway that you can start thinking about to implement in your life. So I have two questions for you today to reflect upon. So one is there something that surprised you today that you didn't know before, or that you just generally were surprised to hear? And then the second is, what's one thing that you could take away from today's session to either implement or start thinking about implementing within your day to day? And my recommendation is to make that as small as possible. And as generally, high achieving, ambitious women, we want to make our goals really huge. And I encourage you to do the opposite and to make something super small and super tangible so that it makes it as realistic as possible within your life. We'll be sharing the recording along with the follow-up resource that Helena mentioned, which will be some recipes for you guys, just some simple recipe suggestions. And then we'll also have a feedback request. So we want to make these sessions as valuable as possible for you. So please fill out the feedback form. We'd love to know what you think of today. And then finally, just to finish, if you want to stay connected, if you want more from Friday Croissant Club, you can join us for many an upcoming in-person event in London. We'll also be running more virtual workshops, and we have a group coaching program launching in January next year. So follow us on Instagram if you're not already to stay up to date. And then Helena, how can we stay connected with you?
Yeah, so I am on Instagram, and even though I said many things about it today, so yeah, I'm at the Somatic Nutritionist on Instagram. But probably where I share more in-depth things, I have a Substack, which is called the Nourish Woman Blueprint, and I very much share weekly in-depth essays on hormones, relationship to food, nervous system, and gut, and specifically for our kind of clientele of women, right? So that's where people love to sort of stay out with me that way. And then yeah, I work one-on-one on a 6 or 12 month basis with people. So that's one way that we can develop a relationship together. And I'm also launching a Nourish Woman Blueprint group cohort in January. So that's going to be very much tied into the approach that we talked about here, and very nervous system and female biology led. So yeah, we'll send all these links in our follow-up email too.
Well, thank you so much for your time this evening. Thank you to everyone online for joining us and for being so engaged and for the great questions. I wish you a lovely rest of the evening, and we will be in touch soon.